And Diptyka Laurent is here in the studio with me to take a look at the main stories of the day. And first to Singapore, where there's much focus, isn't there, Dipty, on Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un ahead of their meeting tomorrow.
That's right, Annette. A historic meeting. That's what pretty much all the papers are saying on their front pages. It's also a high-stakes, high-security summit for the Singaporean paper Straits Times. It'll be the most keenly watched political meeting of the year that could impact not just the security of North Korea, but also Asia and the world as a whole, while Kim Jong-un, the North Korean leader, is also on the front page of the South Korean paper Korea Jungang Daily. The paper reminding us that this is the furthest diplomatic trip he's taken since he became president.
And this summit, of course, also been the stuff of cartoonists. What have you found?
A lot of jeering and caricaturing, as you can imagine, this summit between two very larger-than-life personalities. For The Guardian's cartoonist Ben Jennings, well, he sends up this purported bromance between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un. Here they are, getting their hair done like two ladies chatting in a hair salon, while you can see in the background there the ghost of the leaders of the G7 summit that he has offended, looking on angrily. While vanity is also the theme of a cartoon from Patrick Adcock, who mocks the self-congratulating natures of both leaders. Here they are, focused only on the optics. This summit is going to make me look awesome, each one of them is saying, and you see in the corner there, they both have an I love me mug.
Now, as you mentioned there, Trump, of course, having headed to Singapore after that rather divisive G7 summit in Canada, and, not surprisingly, you found a lot of criticism about his behaviour towards G7 leaders.
Well, there's an interesting article from Slate, Annette. Basically, the writer in this article slams Donald Trump's behavior at the summit, his belligerence, his arrogance, stubbornness, the refusal to sign the G7 statement, the fact that Trump and his entourage arrived late and left early. The writer says it's clear that Trump himself doesn't really see himself as a Western leader anymore. He shows more affinity with people like Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, and he never has a bad word to say about his friend Vladimir Putin, the Russian president. Forget bringing back Russia to the G7 summit. Perhaps it's time for the US to leave the G7 summit altogether, at least for this writer.
Interesting viewpoint there. OK, now you're also taking a look at a diplomatic spat between Italy and Malta over a migrant boat arriving on its shores in Italy and basically being refused permission to dock.
That's right. It's actually essentially stranded at sea right now. That's a migrant boat carrying over 600 migrants picked up from 6 different rescue missions by the Italian Navy in the waters there. Well, it is stranded in the Mediterranean Sea right now as the Italian government, the new hardline government, has refused flat out to allow the boat to dock on Italian shores. Now, Italy argues that its neighbor Malta is geographically closer to the African continent and should bear some of the brunt in taking in these migrants. Malta says the zone where the migrants were picked up falls under Italian jurisdiction. It's a position that the Italian daily Il Fatto Quotidiano critiques, essentially accusing Malta of passing the buck and bending the rules to escape its own responsibilities. Meanwhile, former Maltese Foreign Minister Tonio Borg, he's spoken to the Times of Malta and says, no, Malta should stick to its guns on migrants, adding that these kind of disputes with Italy arise every time there's a right-wing government in power.
Now, moving on to a bit of sports news and, of course, the French Open with Rafael Nadal scoring his 11th victory yesterday here in Paris.
That's right. The accolades are pouring in for Rafa after he nailed his 11th French Open title, winning straight sets over Dominic Thiem. Sans partage, that's what L'Équipe, the French paper, says on its front page. You'll see here, sans partage, he's gripping the trophy quite tightly there. The paper says he was phenomenal. For the Spanish paper Marca, Rafa's emotions after this win were just the same as if it were his first win. Finally, he's simply the king of clay. That's what the Spanish daily La Razón.
It was an impressive performance indeed. Now let's take a look at a piece from Libération, the French daily, about the fate that journalists in Mexico are facing 3 weeks before elections.
Well, Mexicans head to the polls in early July to elect their next leader. Now, to give you an idea, Mexico has now become the second most dangerous place for journalists in the world, behind Syria, but ahead of Afghanistan and Iraq. So you can imagine what kind of environment the press are working in there. In the past 2 weeks, 4 journalists have been killed brutally, including a photojournalist who was killed alongside the candidate whose campaign she was covering. President Enrique Peña Nieto's 6-year term has been the bloodiest on record in Mexican history, with dozens of journalists being killed.
Now, finally, here's a story just for me.
It is just for you, Annette.
And also you, both of us being Australians. That is, yet again, a foreign national finding herself or himself in a bit of bother in Australia. We're talking about a South Korean backpacker who's spoken about her ordeal after getting lost in an Australian mountain ravine.
Well, Australia is known for its rugged terrains, and you certainly don't want to get lost in them. Joo Hee-han, a South Korean backpacker and temp worker at a banana farm, she actually fell from the 678-meter high summit of Australia's Mount Tyson last week. She was knocked out unconscious for several hours and, get this, managed to survive for 6 days without any food before being picked up by a rescue helicopter. Well, she's now spoken out about that ordeal, surviving the harsh bushland for days, and says she didn't have any particular outdoor skills to help her either. Her tip, I guess, or her way of surviving, she sang her favorite song over and over again. That song is called Young, Dumb and Broke by the US singer Khaled, a tune that literally gave her the will to survive, hence this title here, Young, Dumb and Stoked.
Okay, on that note, all I'm going to say, for any young person heading to Australia who's wanting to backpack into the bush, please take care. Thanks for that, Dipti. And if you want to take a look at the stories that we've been talking about, you can, of course, head to our website, that being france24.com.